The classroom was supposed to be full. It was the first day of school, but by 10 a.m., every single desk was empty except for one. In the entire building, with its rules and its warnings and its absolute authority, only one person remained, a 5-year-old girl, and she wasn't moving. Her name was Chloe, and her presence in that room was a direct violation of Principal Greer's new rule, a rule so strict, so absolute, it had cleared the entire elementary wing in under 2 hours. This was more than a standoff between a little girl and the man in charge. It was the explosive result of a policy that treated childhood itself as a punishable offense. And it raised a single, burning question. What does a system do when the smallest person it's meant to control simply refuses to be erased? To understand how a school could empty itself of children, you have to understand Principal Arthur Greer. He arrived at McKinley Elementary 3 months before that first day, handpicked by the district to fix what they called a culture problem. Test scores were in the bottom quartile. Referrals for minor disruptions were through the roof. The previous principal was, in the district's words, too permissive. Greer's mandate was simple: restore order, by any means necessary. He started with the hallways. He measured the volume of student conversations with a decibel meter he carried in his pocket. He instituted a silent lunch period. He banned backpacks with cartoon characters, calling them distractions. Every infraction, no matter how small, now had a designated consequence printed in a 27-page handbook that every family was required to sign. The teachers, many of whom had been at McKinley for a decade, watched in silence. Some were relieved. Most were terrified, because they knew what the district did not say out loud. McKinley's culture problem was really a demographics problem. 92% of their students were Black or Latino. 85% qualified for free lunch. The district saw disorder. The teachers saw poverty, stress, and kids being kids. Greer saw a system to be dominated, and he had a theory, one he'd honed at 2 previous struggling schools: zero tolerance, not just for violence or drugs, but for the entire spectrum of childhood unruliness. Talking without permission was an infraction. Wearing the wrong color socks was an infraction. A note passed in class was an infraction, and the consequence for 3 infractions in a single week: mandatory home suspension. For the parent, a $45 readmittance fee. For the student, a full day of missed learning. The school board loved the early numbers. In his first month, office referrals dropped by 60%. What the report didn't show was where those children went. They were just gone, sent home. The classrooms were quieter. Greer called it progress. But the pressure was building beneath the surface like steam in a sealed pot. Parents, most working 2 or 3 jobs, couldn't afford the $45 fee. They couldn't take a day off to watch a child suspended for having a cell phone or wearing a hat, so they kept their kids home preemptively. Attendance began to dip. The teacher's lounge became a chamber of whispered dread. A veteran 3rd-grade teacher, Ms. Alvarez, was written up for non-compliance because she gave a hungry student a second breakfast cereal bar without filing a form. The message was clear: compassion was now a violation of protocol. Then 3 weeks before the new school year, Greer unveiled his masterstroke. An email went out to every family. It was called the First Day Compliance Protocol. It listed 17 new non-negotiable requirements for the first day of school: specific uniform colors down to the shade, approved backpack brands and dimensions, a mandated haircut policy banning any style deemed excessive or distracting. But the centerpiece was Article 9, the silent entry and settle rule. From the moment a student entered the building at 7:15 a.m., they were to proceed directly to their classroom without speaking, place their backpack under their desk, sit with hands folded, and remain in absolute silence until the 8 a.m. bell. Any student who could not or would not comply by 8:05 would be removed from the classroom for the day. No warnings, no second chances. The community erupted. The local parent Facebook group exploded with over 500 comments in 2 hours. A petition against the protocol garnered 300 signatures overnight, but the district backed Greer completely. In a public statement, the superintendent said, "Drastic times call for a reinvention of the learning environment. We support Principal Greer's innovative approach to setting a tone of excellence." The teachers received a follow-up memo. Their annual evaluations would now be partially based on classroom atmosphere metrics. including decibel levels during silent entry and settle. Their careers were now tied to the silence of 5-year-olds. This is where Chloe enters the story. Chloe Williams was 5 years old, with dark brown skin, curly hair in 2 puffs, and a smile that took up her whole face. She lived with her mother, Keisha, a nurse who worked the night shift at the county hospital. They had just moved into the district over the summer. Keisha worked tirelessly to get everything right for the first day. She bought the exact shade of navy blue skirt and white blouse. She found the approved JanSport backpack, though it was comically large on Chloe's small frame. She even practiced the silent entry and settle routine at home, turning it into a game of statues. Chloe would giggle and then clamp her hands over her mouth, her eyes sparkling. She was excited. School was going to be an adventure. Keisha dropped her off at 7:20 that morning, kissing her forehead. "Remember our game, baby? You can do it." Chloe nodded seriously, adjusted her giant backpack, and walked into the building. The hallways were a surreal, tense quiet. Teachers stood at their doors like sentinels, not smiling, just watching. Children moved like ghosts in a line, their eyes wide. Chloe's classroom was room 107. Her teacher, a first-year educator named Mr. Davies, gave her a tight, nervous smile and pointed to a desk. Chloe sat. She folded her hands. She looked at the colorful alphabet border on the wall. She waited. And then she heard a sound. From the hallway, a soft, hiccuping sob. A little boy in the line had tripped and skinned his knee. He was trying so hard to be quiet, but the pain was too much. A single, choked whimper escaped. A teacher's aide swooped in, took his arm, and without a word began leading him away from the classroom down the hall toward the office for removal. Chloe watched this happen. She saw the boy's terrified face. She saw the other children quickly look at their feet. In that moment, the game of statues stopped being a game. The rules stopped being about hands and silence. She understood, with the brutal clarity of a child, that this was about something else. This was about being erased for making a sound. The 8 a.m. bell rang. Mr. Davies began calling roll. "Chloe Williams," he said. Chloe did not answer. She was supposed to say here, but her throat felt tight. She was still thinking about the boy. "Chloe Williams," Mr. Davies said again, a note of anxiety in his voice. The protocol stated that non-response was non-compliance. He looked at her. Every other child in the room looked at her. The clock ticked to 8:01. At 8:02, the intercom crackled. "Room 107, report your compliance status." Mr. Davies picked up the phone. His voice was a whisper. "One student non-compliant." There was a pause. Then the intercom voice, cold and clear, said, "Remove and report." This was the mechanism Greer had built. A system that turned a teacher into an enforcer, a classroom into a panopticon, and a child's moment of frozen fear into an infraction. Mr. Davies walked to Chloe's desk. He leaned down. "Chloe, honey, you need to answer me. Just say here, please." Chloe looked up at him. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She shook her head, a tiny, defiant movement. A tear spilled down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. The door to the classroom opened. It was Mrs. Gable, the assistant principal. She didn't enter. She stood in the threshold and scanned the room. Mr. Davies, the student. Her voice wasn't unkind, just utterly efficient. Mr. Davies pointed helplessly at Chloe. Mrs. Gable nodded. "Chloe Williams, please gather your belongings and come with me." This was the procedure. The removal, the $45 fee, the missed day, the report that would go in a file. But Chloe did not move. She tightened her grip on the edges of her chair. She looked at Mrs. Gable, then at Mr. Davies, then at the empty desk where the crying boy had been supposed to sit. And she made her decision. She shook her head again. Mrs. Gable's expression shifted from efficiency to confusion. This wasn't in the protocol. The protocol assumed children would obey. "Chloe, you need to come now," she said, firmer. "No," Chloe said. The word was so small, but in the silent room, it was like a firecracker. A beat of stunned silence, then the intercom buzzed again. "Room 107, status." Mrs. Gable, flustered, keyed her walkie-talkie. "We have a refusal to comply with removal." A longer pause, then a new voice came over the speaker. Calm, controlled, and utterly chilling, it was Principal Greer. "Implement the cascading protocol, clear the room." The cascading protocol. This was Greer's nuclear option, a contingency he'd drafted but never believed he'd use. If a student's noncompliance was deemed a contagious disruption, The entire class was to be evacuated to the gymnasium for de-escalation. The non-compliant student would be isolated. It was a tactic of sheer psychological force. Mr. Davies's face went pale. "Class," he said, his voice trembling, "line up at the door. Quietly, please." One by one, the other children stood, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. They filed out of the room, past Mrs. Gable, past Chloe, who sat like a stone in a river of movement. In 3 minutes, the classroom was empty. 24 desks, 23 empty chairs. The colorful posters on the walls looked suddenly garish and absurd. Chloe was alone. She sat in the profound silence, her pink backpack leaning against her chair like a loyal, oversized pet. She could hear the distant murmur of the school resuming its new, unnatural rhythm. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She was 5 years old, and she had just broken the most important rule in the world she knew, and she had no idea what happened next. But Principal Greer did. The report of a cascading protocol activation lit up his office monitor. For him, this wasn't a tragedy, it was a test, the ultimate test of his system. If he could break this one tiny point of resistance, his authority would be absolute. The school would be his forever. He took off his glasses, polished them slowly on his brown tweed jacket, and stood up from his desk. His footsteps echoed in the now quiet hallway as he walked toward room 107. He was not angry, he was calculated. This was a problem to be solved. And as he turned the final corner, he saw her through the classroom door's window, a small, dark shape in a sea of empty desks. He placed his hand on the door handle, and that's when he saw her face. She wasn't crying. She wasn't hiding. She was looking directly at the door, at him, with a frown of pure, unadulterated defiance. For a long moment, Principal Greer did not open the door. He observed. This was his training, assessed the subject. The child was small, female, approximately 5 years of age. She showed signs of emotional distress, a single tear track on her cheek, but her posture was rigid, her gaze fixed. This was not a meltdown. This was a calculated refusal. In his 23 years in education, he had never seen a child this young make a stand of this nature. It was fascinating. And it was, above all, a direct challenge to the system he had built. He could not allow it to exist. He turned the handle and entered. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing them in the quiet. He did not walk toward her immediately. He moved to the front of the room, placing himself near Mr. Davies's desk, establishing the power position. He folded his arms, not in anger, but in a display of absolute patience. He was a mountain, she was a speck. The physics of the situation were clear. "Chloe Williams," he said. His voice was calm, modulated, the voice he used for school board presentations. "My name is Principal Greer. You are currently in violation of the first day compliance protocol. Do you understand what that means?" Chloe looked at him. She said nothing. "It means you have broken a school rule," he continued, as if explaining to a very slow learner. "The rule you broke required you to leave this classroom when asked by an adult. Because you broke that rule, your classmates had to leave. Do you understand that your actions have consequences for others?" He was employing a classic technique, transferring the burden of guilt, making her responsible for the emptiness around her. A flicker of something doubt passed over her face. Her lower lip trembled. Greer saw it. He pressed the advantage. "Now we can fix this. You will stand up, pick up your backpack, and walk with me to the office. Your mother will be called. You will go home for the day. Tomorrow you may try again. That is the procedure. Do you understand the procedure?" Chloe's hands, which had been gripping the sides of her chair, tightened until her knuckles were white. She swallowed, and then she shook her head, a small, slow, side-to-side movement. "No." Greer's expression did not change, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. The patient mountain showed a fissure. "Chloe," he said, his voice dropping a degree, losing its false warmth. "This is not a discussion. This is a directive from your principal. You will stand up, now." He took one step forward. It was a subtle movement, but in the empty room, it was as loud as a shout. Chloe flinched. She pulled her feet up onto the chair, wrapping her arms around her knees, making herself into a smaller, tighter ball, but she did not stand. She burrowed her face against her knees. Her entire body communicated one word: no asterisk. In the office, Mrs. Gable was watching the clock. The cascading protocol had a follow-up timer. If the non-compliant student was not secured within 10 minutes, the next escalation was to involve school security, which at McKinley meant calling the district's lone safety officer, a retired police officer named Carl. Mrs. Gable had never had to make that call. She picked up the phone to dial Keisha Williams first, her hand trembling. Each ring felt like an accusation. Keisha Williams was just walking into her apartment after her 12-hour night shift. The phone rang as she was toeing off her shoes. Exhaustion turned to ice when she heard Mrs. Gable's voice. "There's been an incident with Chloe. She's refusing to follow instructions. We need you to come to the school immediately." "Is she hurt?" Keisha's voice was sharp, a nurse's instinct. "No, she's not hurt. She's being non-compliant. Principal Greer is with her now." "Non-compliant? She's 5. What does that even mean?" "Ms. Williams, please just come. There's a $45 readmittance fee, and you should prepare for possible suspension." The word *suspension hit Keisha like a physical blow. She leaned against her kitchen counter, the world tilting. Her daughter, her bright, smiling girl, was facing suspension on her first day of school. For what? For being non-compliant. A fury, hot and clean, burned through the fatigue. "I'm on my way," she said, her voice low and steady. "You tell that principal not to touch my child." Back in room 107, the stalemate had entered its 8th minute. Greer had tried silence. He had tried reason. He had tried implied threat. Nothing worked. The child was a locked box. He realized with dawning frustration that all his protocols, all his laminated sheets and escalation charts were designed for children who were fundamentally biddable. They were for children who believed in the system's power. This child did not. She had seen the boy taken away for crying and had decided the system itself was the enemy. In her small, fierce logic, to obey was to surrender to something cruel. He made his decision. He would not touch her. That was a liability minefield, but he could make the environment untenable. He walked to the intercom panel on the wall and pressed the button for the office. "Mrs. Gable, please have Officer Carl report to room 107 and bring the digital camera. We need to document the refusal for the disciplinary file." His words were sterile, but their meaning was violent. He was calling security on a kindergarten. He was creating a permanent record of her defiance. He spoke deliberately, ensuring Chloe heard every word. This was the language of institutional power, and he was fluent in it. Chloe peeked out from behind her knees. Her eyes were wide with a new kind of fear. She didn't know who Officer Carl was, but she knew it was bad. A sob finally escaped, a harsh, ragged sound that broke the quiet. Greer felt a spike of satisfaction. Finally, the crack in the dam. He remained by the intercom, a statue of authority, waiting for the reinforcements that would end this. But the crack didn't widen into collapse. Instead, the sob seemed to solidify her. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, smearing the tear track. She looked at Greer, at the man who had called a policeman to a room with a little girl and a backpack, and something in her face shifted from fear to a kind of blazing, righteous anger. She unfolded herself. She planted her feet firmly on the floor. She sat up straight, squared her small shoulders, and stared him down. The message was unmistakable: "I'm not leaving." Meanwhile, a different kind of chain reaction was starting. The 23 other children from room 107 were sitting cross-legged on the cold gym floor, supervised by a harried PE teacher. They were confused and scared, but children are porous. They absorb fear, but they also absorb stories. And the story of the little girl who said no to the principal began to leak out. A boy named Miguel whispered to his friend, "Chloe, in trouble." "Is she getting arrested?" His friend whispered back, eyes huge. "I dunno. My mom says this school is like jail now." The whisper traveled. By the time Mr. Davies was allowed to retrieve his class 30 minutes later, the rumor had mutated and grown. Chloe was locked in a closet. The principal was yelling. The police were coming. The children returned to their classroom, but the room was no longer just a room. It was a crime scene, and Chloe's empty desk was a monument. Mr. Davies, his own career now hanging by a thread for his failure to control the situation, tried to begin a lesson. It was useless. Every child kept glancing at Chloe's desk, at the door. The atmosphere was thick with a silent, collective terror. They had learned the real first-day lesson: obedience is safety. Resistance makes you disappear. In the parking lot, Keisha's old sedan screeched to a halt. She didn't bother parking in a spot. She ran toward the main entrance, her nurse's scrubs a flash of blue in the morning sun. She was stopped at the door by a secretary who demanded she sign in and wait. "My daughter is 5, Keisha said, her voice trembling with rage. "You will let me through to her right now." The secretary, an older woman named Brenda who had seen principals come and go, looked at Keisha's face, the fear, the fury, the exhaustion, and made a decision. She pushed the sign-in clipboard away. "Room 107, down the East Hall. Hurry." Keisha ran. Her footsteps echoed in the silent hallway, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive quiet. As she neared the classroom, she saw 2 figures approaching from the other end, a large man in a security uniform and Mrs. Gable holding a small digital camera. Her heart seized. She sprinted the last few feet and threw open the classroom door. The scene that greeted her would be etched in her memory forever. Her daughter, small and alone at a desk, her back rod straight, and Principal Greer, standing like a warden by the wall, turning with a look of cold annoyance at the interruption. No one was touching Chloe. No one was speaking. It was a silent, psychological siege. "Mama," the word was a cry of pure relief. Chloe's defiance crumbled into the desperate need for her mother. She scrambled from the chair and ran to Keisha, burying her face in her scrubs. Keisha knelt, wrapping her arms around her daughter, feeling the violent tremors running through the small body. She looked over Chloe's head at Principal Greer. "What is going on here?" Greer composed himself, smoothing his tweed jacket. "Ms. Williams, Chloe has been persistently non-compliant, resulting in a major disruption. We are in the process of documenting the incident for her disciplinary file. Officer Carl is here to ensure a safe resolution." Keisha stood up, placing herself between Greer and her child. "A safe resolution? You called security on a 5-year-old? For what? For sitting? For refusing a direct order from multiple administrators, causing a classroom evacuation, and willfully disregarding school policy," Greer recited. "The consequences are clearly outlined in the handbook you signed." The handbook, the $45 fee, the suspension. Keisha saw the trap. It was all legal. It was all by the book. Her signature was on the book. The helplessness threatened to drown her. But then she looked down at Chloe, who was clinging to her leg, and the helplessness ignited into something else. "You evacuate a classroom because one child is scared. You call that safety? You call that education?" Her voice rose, echoing in the empty room. "What did you do to her?" "I followed protocol," Greer said, a note of finality in his voice. "To maintain order for the other 499 students in this building. Now you will take Chloe home. She is suspended for the remainder of the day. The readmittance fee must be paid before she can return tomorrow, pending a behavioral contract." Officer Carl shifted his weight uncomfortably. Mrs. Gable looked at the floor, the camera hanging uselessly at her side. Keisha knew she couldn't win this battle in this room under these rules. She had to get Chloe out, but as she took her daughter's hand and turned to leave, she fired one last shot. This isn't over. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. She led Chloe out, past the security officer, down the hall where other classroom doors were firmly shut. The school felt like a fortress holding its breath. It wasn't until they were in the harsh sunlight of the parking lot that Chloe finally spoke, her voice a tiny whisper. "Mama, I'm sorry." Keisha knelt again, holding her daughter's face. "No, baby, no, you have nothing to be sorry for. Tell me what happened." And Chloe told her. In the simple, stark language of a child, she told her about the quiet, about the boy who cried, about the teacher's scared face, about the lady telling her to leave, about the principal who talked like a robot and called a policeman. Keisha listened, and with each word, her understanding of what was happening inside McKinley Elementary shifted from anxiety to horror. This wasn't discipline. This was systemic psychological coercion. She buckled Chloe into the car seat, her mind racing. She was a single mother, a night shift nurse with no money for a lawyer, no influence with the district. But she had a phone, and she had a story. She drove home, put on a cartoon for Chloe, and then she did what any modern parent would do. She went to the private parent Facebook group, the one with 500 members. Her hands were shaking as she typed. She didn't yell. She didn't use caps lock. She simply presented the facts as her daughter had given them to her. My 5-year-old daughter, Chloe, was suspended on her first day of kindergarten at McKinley today. The reason listed is non-compliance. What actually happened? She was scared and didn't answer during roll call. They tried to remove her from class. She refused to leave her seat. So they evacuated her entire class of 23 other kids. The principal then confronted her alone in the empty room and called school security on her. They told me I have to pay $45 to let her back in tomorrow. Has anyone else experienced anything like this with the new protocols? She hit post. Then she put her phone face down on the kitchen table and cried, the silent, shuddering tears of sheer powerless exhaustion. She assumed her post would get a few sympathetic comments, maybe a few, "That's terrible," responses from other frustrated parents. She had no idea what she had just unleashed. Because while Keisha was crying, her post was traveling. In the quiet of their own homes, other McKinley parents, who had been seething in silence for weeks, saw it. The mother of the boy who had been removed for crying saw it. The father of a third grader who'd been sent home for a mismatched sock saw it. The teacher's aides, who were also in the group, saw it. With each furious comment, the story morphed from an individual incident into a collective indictment. The dam of fear that Greer's regime had built began to crack, and the first question to spill out was one that would ripple all the way to the district office. If they'll do this to a 5-year-old on her first day, what won't they do? The Facebook post did not get a few comments. It got hundreds. Within an hour, Keisha's phone began to buzz incessantly, notifications flooding in. Parents she'd never met were sharing their own stories. A mother wrote about her son, a second grader, who'd been given a level 2 infraction for laughing too loudly at lunch. Another told how her daughter had wet herself in class because she was too afraid to ask for a bathroom pass during the mandated focus block. Each story was a piece of the same mosaic, a culture of fear where normal childhood behavior was being pathologized and punished. Then a new comment appeared, one that changed the entire temperature. It was from Mark and Lisa Torres, the parents of the little boy from that morning, the one who had cried. They had been called to pick him up, paid the fee, and been told he was emotionally disruptive. They'd been too embarrassed to say anything until now. "That was our son," Lisa wrote. "He fell and skinned his knee. He was in pain, and they removed him like he was a contaminant. We are so sorry your daughter saw that. And we are so grateful she had the courage to do what we didn't." The connection was made. Chloe's defiance wasn't random. It was a direct reaction to witnessing an injustice. The post was no longer just about a rule. It was about the moral compass of a 5-year-old shining a light on a broken system. The group's moderators, who had initially tried to temper the discussion, were overwhelmed. The post was shared outside the group, to community pages, to other school districts. By that evening, it had reached the local news. A reporter from the Asterisk Metro Tribune saw the thread and called Keisha. Exhausted but resolute, Keisha gave her first interview, her voice steady as she described the empty classroom, the called security officer, the $45 fee. "They're monetizing fear," she said, a phrase the reporter would use as the headline. The story went online at 9 p.m. Principal Greer saw it. He was at his desk, reviewing disciplinary reports from the first day 19 students sent home, a record he viewed as a success, when an email alert popped up with the Tribune asterisk link. His face, usually an impassive mask, flushed with anger. This was insubordination of a different kind, a parent taking internal matters to the press. He immediately drafted a response email to the entire McKinley parent listserv. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic deflection. "Dear McKinley families," it began, "it is unfortunate that a private student matter has been misrepresented in public forums. McKinley Elementary is committed to a safe, structured, and equitable learning environment for all. Our protocols are research-based and applied uniformly to ensure every student has the opportunity to succeed free from disruption. We cannot comment on individual cases, but we affirm our full support for our staff's professional judgment in maintaining an atmosphere conducive to learning." He cited research, equity, and professional judgment, the holy trinity of defensive administration. He hit send, believing the matter would be contained by his authority and jargon. It had the opposite effect. Parents who were already simmering read the cold, corporate language and exploded. The comments section beneath the online news story filled with outrage. "Uniformly applied? one parent wrote. My white neighbor's kid got a warning for the same thing my black son got suspended for last week. Where's the research on that? This was the crack that split the foundation. The conversation organically turned from strict rules to something far more uncomfortable: race. Parents began comparing notes not just on punishments, but on who was receiving them. Patterns emerged. The children targeted for the most subjective infractions, defiance, disrespect, excessive noise, were overwhelmingly children of color. The few white students who were disciplined were mostly for clear, tangible violations like a phone or a shoving match. The data was anecdotal, but the pattern was unmistakable. And someone knew where to find the real data. An anonymous email sent to Keisha and the Tribune * reporter with a subject line that read, "McKinley discipline numbers FYI." Attached were internal spreadsheets from the previous school year before Greer's arrival, showing suspension rates by grade and race. The numbers were bad, but a second sheet, a draft report from Greer's first month, showed projections. His zero-tolerance model was predicted to increase overall suspensions by 30%, with the most significant impact anticipated in early elementary cohorts. It was a blueprint, and it was working exactly as designed. The system wasn't broken. It was functioning with chilling efficiency. Keisha stared at the spreadsheet on her laptop, Chloe asleep on the couch beside her. The cold, hard numbers made her feel both vindicated and nauseous. Her daughter wasn't a data point. She was a little girl, but now she was also a symbol. Keisha knew she had to step out of her private fear and into a public fight. She reached out to the Torres family, then to a few other parents who had shared powerful stories online. They formed a hesitant, makeshift group. They decided on a name: Parents for McKinley Justice. Their first demand: an immediate moratorium on the first-day compliance protocol and the $45 fee. They posted the demand publicly, and then they waited for the district to respond. The district's response was silence. For 2 days, nothing. The superintendent's office issued a one-line statement: "We are aware of the concerns and are reviewing the matter internally." It was a classic stall tactic, but the pressure was not dissipating, it was coalescing. The local NAACP chapter took notice. A well-known community organizer, Reverend James Miller, called Keisha. "What's happening at McKinley isn't an accident," he told her. "It's a policy. And policies can be changed." Meanwhile, inside McKinley, a different kind of rupture was occurring. The teachers were cracking. The public scrutiny had pulled back the curtain, and they could no longer hide behind their fear. In the privacy of their homes, away from the school's network, some began to talk. An anonymous Twitter account appeared, called McKinley Truth. Its first tweet was a photo of the laminated list of 37 rules hanging outside Greer's office. Its second was a screenshot of a teacher's email inbox, flooded with directives about monitoring facial expressions of noncompliance in students. Then the account posted a voice recording. It was muffled, but clear enough. A teacher's voice, trembling with emotion. "He told us in a staff meeting that empathy is a loophole in the discipline matrix. He said our job was to enforce, not to understand." The recording was only 30 seconds long. It was enough. The district could ignore parents. It could dismiss news articles, but it could not ignore a staff rebellion. The school board called an emergency closed-door meeting. The superintendent finally reached out to Keisha and the parent group, not with an answer, but with an invitation: a private meeting the next day. It felt like a victory, a chance to be heard. But as Keisha prepared for the meeting, gathering her notes, printing out the damning spreadsheets, a new email arrived. It was from a woman named Susan, who identified herself as a former teacher at Greer's previous school in a different state. The subject line was, "He did this before." Keisha's blood ran cold. She opened it. "I taught at Lincoln Elementary for 10 years, the email began. "Arthur Greer was our principal for 2 of them. He implemented almost identical protocols. Silent lunches, behavior charts, publicly shamming kids, exorbitant readmittance fees. He called it the Lincoln Way. In his second year, a little boy in my class, a sweet kid named Ben who had anxiety, had a panic attack during a standardized test. He couldn't breathe. He cried. Greer had him removed for disrupting the testing environment. The family fought back. Greer had the school psychologist label the incident as volitional misconduct to justify a long-term suspension. The family moved away. The story was buried. I quit at the end of that year. I've carried the guilt ever since. What you're describing isn't new. It's his playbook. He believes he's saving schools by breaking children's spirits first. Please stop him. Attached were scanned documents, old school newsletters touting the Lincoln Way, a disciplinary memo with Greer's signature, a local news clipping about a contentious school board meeting that made vague reference to disciplinary concerns. The pattern was now a pathology. Greer wasn't just a strict principal, he was a recidivist. He had left a trail of broken children and silenced teachers, and he had simply moved to a new district to do it again. Keisha printed this email too. Her hands were steady. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, focused certainty. The private meeting with the superintendent was no longer the goal. It was a stage. She knew what she had to do. She forwarded the email to the *Tribune reporter and to Reverend Miller. She then called the other parents in her group. "We're not asking for a meeting anymore," she told them. "We're giving them one tomorrow, and we're not going alone." Next morning at 7 a.m., an hour before the private meeting was scheduled, Keisha Williams stood at the entrance to McKinley Elementary. She was not alone. Beside her stood Mark and Lisa Torres, and behind them 30 other parents holding handmade signs. No fees for fear, compassion not compliance. CHLOE was right. They were quiet, but their presence was a deafening roar. They were not blocking the entrance. They were lining the walkway, a silent guard of honor and protest. Teachers arriving for work saw them. Some looked down, hurrying inside. Others met Keisha's eyes and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Children being dropped off stared wide-eyed. A local news van pulled up, then another. The *Tribune reporter was there, live streaming on her phone. Principal Greer arrived at 7:20. His car slowed as he approached the crowd. For a moment, it seemed he might not stop. Then he pulled into his reserved spot. He got out, adjusted his tweed jacket, and began walking toward the building, his face a rigid mask of contempt, as if walking through a bad smell. He did not look at the parents. He did not look at the cameras. He looked straight ahead at the doors of his kingdom. Keisha stepped forward just one step into his path. He had to stop or walk into her. He stopped. "Principal Greer," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the morning air. "We're here for our meeting with the district. We've decided to have it out here where everyone can see. We have questions and we have evidence." She held up the folder in her hand, the one containing the spreadsheets, the email from the former teacher, the stories of dozens of families. Greer's eyes flicked to it, then back to her face. The stern expression finally cracked, not into bewilderment, but into a flash of pure, unadulterated fury. He saw not a parent, but a mutineer. He said nothing. He sidestepped her and walked into the building, the doors swinging shut behind him. But the doors could no longer keep the world out. The story was no longer inside McKinley. It was outside, on the sidewalk, in the news vans, spreading across social media. The district superintendent's car pulled up 10 minutes later. He took one look at the scene, the cameras, the determined faces of the parents, and knew the private meeting was over. The real meeting had already begun. The superintendent, a man named Dr. Evans, did not go inside. He stood on the steps, the microphone from a news channel pointed at his face, the parents arrayed before him like a jury. He had prepared talking points about due process and internal reviews. They evaporated in the morning air. He looked at Keisha Williams, holding her folder of evidence. He looked at the faces of the other parents, etched with anger and exhaustion. He looked at the cameras. And he understood that the cost of defending Arthur Greer had just become higher than the cost of firing him. "I want to thank the families for bringing their concerns forward so visibly," he began, choosing his words with immense care. "The district takes these allegations about disciplinary practices at McKinley Elementary with the utmost seriousness. Effective immediately, I am suspending all components of the so-called first-day compliance protocol. The $45 readmittance fee is rescinded. All suspensions issued under that protocol yesterday are expunged from student records." A ripple of shock went through the crowd. It was more than they had demanded. He was conceding everything, publicly, on the spot. Keisha felt a surge of dizzying relief, but she didn't drop her folder. She knew a tactical retreat when she saw one. Dr. Evans continued. "Furthermore, Principal Arthur Greer is being placed on administrative leave, pending a full, independent investigation into the practices at McKinley and his previous district. An interim principal will be appointed by the end of the day. There it was, the fall. It was swift, clinical, and designed to protect the district above all else. Greer was being offered up as the sole bad actor, the rogue element. The system that hired him, empowered him, and praised his early results would escape scrutiny. For now, it was enough. Inside the building, watching from his office window, Greer saw it happen. He saw Dr. Evans speak. He saw the parents react. He didn't need to hear the words. The body language told him everything. His shoulders, usually held in perfect posture, slumped. The stern expression dissolved into something hollow and defeated. He was not being defeated by the parents or even by the little girl. He was being defeated by the calculus of public relations. He was a liability that had just been neutralized. He turned from the window, removed a few personal items from his desk, a pen, a framed photo of a generic mountain landscape, and left through a back door 20 minutes later. He would never set foot in McKinley Elementary again. The news spread through the school like an electric current. Teachers looked at each other in the hallways, not with celebration, but with a profound, disbelieving stillness. The oppressive silence that had been mandated was broken by a different kind of quiet, the quiet of sudden, unplanned freedom. Mr. Davies in room 107 received an all-staff email announcing the changes. He read it twice, then walked to Chloe's empty desk. He gently straightened the chair. He didn't know what to feel. For Keisha, the victory was overwhelming and strange. Reporters surrounded her. "How do you feel?" they asked. She looked for Chloe, who was holding her grandfather's hand at the edge of the crowd, watching her mother with wide, confused eyes. "I feel like I can breathe," Keisha answered, "and I feel like the real work is just starting." The real work was indeed just starting. The independent investigation, led by a former judge, began the following week. Dozens of parents and teachers gave statements. The spreadsheet of disciplinary data was entered into the official record. The email from the teacher at Greer's old school was corroborated. The picture that emerged was not of one man's cruelty, but of a system perfectly designed to produce it. A system that valued order over humanity, compliance over growth, and data points over children. 3 weeks after the protest, the school board held a public meeting to receive the investigation's findings. The auditorium was packed. Keisha and Chloe sat in the front row, Chloe swinging her legs, clutching her now-famous pink backpack. The report was damning. It found a pattern of racially disproportionate disciplinary actions, the punitive monetization of minor infractions, and a climate of fear that inhibited learning and traumatized students and staff. It recommended the termination of Arthur Greer's contract and a complete overhaul of the district's discipline policies. The board voted unanimously to accept the recommendations. Then something unexpected happened. A board member, an older woman named Mrs. Henderson, asked to speak. "I voted to hire Dr. Greer," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I was sold on the idea of structure. I saw the referral numbers go down and I called it progress. I did not ask * how the numbers went down. I am so sorry. To the families, to the children, we failed you. We were stewards of a system, and we forgot we were stewards of people first." It was a public apology of a kind rarely heard. It didn't fix anything, but it acknowledged the deeper truth. The problem was not a lone tyrant, but a culture that had created a space for him to thrive. With Greer gone and the protocols dismantled, McKinley began the slow, awkward process of healing. The interim principal, a veteran educator named Dr. Flores, held a school-wide assembly. She didn't give a speech about rules. She apologized to the students. She said, "This is your school. You should feel safe here. You should feel joy here. My job is to help you learn, not to police you." For the first time in months, the children in the gymnasium fidgeted and whispered, and no one shushed them. The sound was like music. Chloe returned to school. Her readmittance fee was refunded. The behavioral contract was shredded. On her first morning back, she walked into room 107. Her classmates stared. Then a little girl named Sophia walked over and took her hand. "I'm glad you're back," she whispered. One by one, the other children came over. They didn't fully understand what had happened, but they understood that Chloe had been brave and that the scary quiet was gone. Mr. Davies, fighting back tears, said, "Welcome back, Chloe, we missed you." The change was not instant magic. The fear had left a residue. Some teachers, so conditioned by the old regime, struggled to relax. Some children tested the new boundaries, but the direction had irrevocably shifted. The focus moved from compliance to connection. Restorative circles replaced silent lunch. Teachers were encouraged to learn their students' stories, not just log their infractions. And then came the final, surprising detail. A month after the board meeting, Keisha received a formal letter from the district. It wasn't about policy, it was a check, a settlement they called it to avoid litigation. It was for $15,000, for the emotional distress caused to Chloe. Keisha stared at the number. It was life-changing money for her. It could pay off debt, fix her car, buy Chloe clothes that fit. She could even move to a better apartment. The system was trying to buy its way out of guilt. She almost cashed it, but then she thought about the $45 fee that had started it all. She thought about the other families who couldn't afford new shoes, who worked 3 jobs, who slept on broken sofas. She thought about the Torres family and all the others who had stood with her on the sidewalk. She went back to the newly formed Parents for McKinley Justice Group. They created a fund. Keisha endorsed the check over to it. The other parents, some with tears in their eyes, matched what they could, $5, 20, 50. They called it the Chloe Fund. Its purpose was simple, to pay the hidden costs of poverty that the school district ignored. Field trip fees, school supplies, emergency grocery cards, a pair of glasses for a child who couldn't see the board. It was a small thing, but it was a thing built not on fear, but on mutual care. It was the exact opposite of a $45 punishment fee. The story of the little girl who wouldn't leave her seat did not end with a triumphant parade. It ended with a quiet fund managed by parents in a church basement. It ended with a school gingerly rediscovering its own heartbeat. It ended with Chloe Williams, who still loved her giant pink backpack, starting first grade the following year under a principal who knew her name and smiled when she saw her. The tyranny of the empty classroom was over, but the lesson remained, etched not in a rulebook, but in the collective memory of a community, that sometimes the most powerful act is not to enforce a rule, but to refuse to follow a wrong one, and that the courage to say no can come in any size, even one that fits in a kindergarten chair. And that is where our story turns its final page, and where we find the meaning in the silence that was finally broken. What happened at McKinley Elementary wasn't an isolated incident. It was a case study, a perfect, painful example of what happens when a system designed to educate children becomes more invested in controlling them. When metrics like silence and compliance are valued more than curiosity, more than compassion, more than the simple, messy reality of being a child. We tell this story not because it has a rare fairy tale ending, but because it doesn't. The principal was removed, but the conditions that allowed him to rise, the pressure for quick fixes, the obsession with data over well-being, the unexamined biases that see a black child's resistance as defiance and a white child as spirit, those conditions still exist in thousands of schools, in hundreds of districts. Chloe's stand was a singular spark, but the fire that followed was built by a community that decided it had seen enough. A teacher who leaked a recording, a parent from another state who broke her silence, a school board member who offered a real apology. This is how systems are truly changed, not by toppling a single king, but by rebuilding the kingdom with different values, brick by brick, story by story. The Chloe Fund, that small pot of money paying for glasses and field trips, is a more powerful policy document than any 27-page handbook. It declares, in the simplest terms, that support is more effective than punishment, that a child who is seen and helped will always learn more than a child who is feared and monitored. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of a time you felt unseen by an institution, or a time you witnessed a small, brave act of refusal, then this channel is for you. We are here for the stories that don't make the nightly news, but that change the world in quiet rooms and on crowded sidewalks. The stories where the underdog isn't always victorious, but is always, always heard. We tell them because they are true, and because in a world that often shouts, we believe in the power of listening, in the courage of the quiet, in the little girl who, by simply sitting down, taught a whole school how to stand up. If you want to hear more stories like this, stories of quiet resilience and unexpected courage, hit subscribe. Leave a comment below about a time you witnessed a small act of defiance that changed everything. Share this with someone who needs the reminder that they are not alone. We'll be here, waiting with the next story worth staying for.